Hi, this is Kim Kindred. I'm from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, in Northampton County, and this is my environmental science project on saving nature, using native plants in your own backyard. As I sit on my deck enjoying the unusually beautiful February weather, I watch as the red-winged blackbirds descend on my property like a scene from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. My husband comments, "Why do these birds love our property so much? They don't seem to be drawn to any of our neighbors." I entertain that thought for a moment, but I don't care because they are my favorite birds, and every year I welcome them back. Red-winged blackbirds are a migratory bird and the first true bird of spring. I counted on seeing them at my farm as the first sign that winter was coming to an end. Now, living in a suburban neighborhood where I can count 28 rooftops from my deck, having the privilege of seeing this wildlife up close and in my backyard is this country girl's dream. I began to wonder what my yard had to offer that kept drawing the birds back. My property always seemed like it was a bit of a mess, and so initially I thought all this was my imagination until I began to dig deeper. What could I do to ensure their return and encourage more wildlife in my yard? I've always had a love for the land and would dabble at gardening wherever I could, learning as I went along. People garden for many reasons. Whatever the reason, gardening is the one time where all of us can make a difference in the world, right in our backyards. All plants are not created equal, especially in their ability to sustain local wildlife. I found out that the yard that I thought was a mess was actually providing everything that my red-winged blackbird needed to survive their migration to their breeding grounds. 96% of North American birds rely on insects as their main food source and cannot eat the plant directly. It takes up to 400 caterpillars to raise one nestling of baby birds. It is up to us then to plant a landscape hospitable for wildlife. If the main source of food for birds is insects, then we need to have plants in our yard for the insects to eat. After thousands of years of coexisting and natural evolution, native plants provide the food source for the insects that the birds dine on. With our pristine landscape disappearing, gardens then are the new nature. We can collectively protect and conserve local biological diversity that is vital and irreplaceable right in our backyards. What is meant by pristine? Pristine is how land was originally found. A recent poll revealed that most people describe Pennsylvania's landscape as coal mines, industry, farmland, grass, rolling hills, and clay soil. While the rolling hills and clay soil are accurate depictions of pristine Pennsylvania, the rest is not. Ironically, farmland is hundreds of years away from pristine native landscape. It is often converted into housing subdivision for people who want the country life. The contractor usually does not even know what native plants to install in the landscape. They tend to gravitate towards ornamental, insect-resistant plants that are non-native in addition to manicured lawns. Usually, insect-resistant and invasive go hand in hand. As I mentioned earlier, insects often have evolved with the plants, and so they have adapted to the host plant's specific chemistry and are able to eat it. In the case of a non-native plant, insects normally cannot eat it since they haven't developed the immunity to its specific toxins. The result is that the plant has no natural herbivores to keep it in check, and it grows rampantly, becoming invasive, or in other words, hard to control. In addition, they use up precious resources that the native plants are competing for: the sun, rain, and nutrients. If there are no insects, then there will be no birds. Humans love their manicured lawns. However, these lawns provide no nutritional benefit to wildlife whatsoever. In the United States, there is 40 million acres of sterile lawns. That's 1.5 times the size of Pennsylvania. Besides not benefiting wildlife with food, they pollute the atmosphere, increasing the carbon footprint every time you mow the grass. This photograph would be an example of pristine Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was named for its woods. The literal translation is Penn's Woods, since William Penn purchased the land and it was covered with trees. In Pennsylvania, less than 1% of the land can be considered wild. Global information systems and satellite usage can accurately gauge how much land has been taken for human use. USDA Natural Resource Conservation Services has estimated that between 1982 and 1997, 2 million acres was lost each year to development nationally, the size of Yellowstone Park every year. That's 30 million acres in 15 years. This doesn't account for the 4 billion linear miles of highway and the 43,480 square miles of driveways and parking lots. That's 5.5 times the size of New Jersey in parking lots. Where 15% of the Amazonian forest have been logged, 70% of the eastern seaboard's forests have been lost. We have taken so much land for ourselves that there is not enough undisturbed land left for wildlife to inhabit. That means it is up to us to provide the food for the wildlife, or species will go locally extinct, meaning they will permanently leave our area. Does this mean that we need to live in a bug-infested, weed-overgrown property with a lot of trees? Not at all. You can still have lawn. However, when deciding on your flora, pick trees, shrubs, and understory plants that are native to your area and provide the biggest diversity to your wildlife. For example, a Norway maple, common in the yards of Pennsylvania, is not native and does not provide the food for local wildlife, whereas an oak tree can sustain over 100 species of insects, which in turn feeds the birds and other wildlife. Just picking a different tree for your yard can have a huge impact. When I looked around my quarter-acre of backyard, I found that I had one mature white oak, two mature black walnut trees, 7 mature box elder trees, and 2 mature ash trees, all native Pennsylvania trees. No wonder my yard was a haven for the birds. If you love flower gardens and do not want to give up your sun, some great examples of native flowers are black-eyed Susan, spiderwort, clematis, and phlox. All of these can be found in your average garden center. Coral bells and ferns can also be found in your garden center and are great for shade. Milkweed and Joe Pye weed are among the favorite for butterflies and caterpillars. In fact, milkweed is the only plant that the monarch butterfly and its larvae will eat. They are very host plant specific. What a great way to support migrating monarchs who need a pit stop on their way to Mexico. Plant some flowering milkweed and have some welcome visitors. These two plants can be purchased at a native plant garden center. There was one right here in the Lehigh Valley, edge of the woods on Route 100 in Orfield. Here are some examples of what native gardens can look like. All plants here are native and create a beautiful entrance to your home. This is a great example of using native plants in a shady area. Tall native plants, such as shown here, greatly cut down on weeding as they do not allow sunlight in the undergrowth. It creates toil-free beauty and lots of pollen for bees and butterflies alike. Instead of lawn, plant native grasses and legumes that provide food for wildlife. This will drastically reduce mowing, which not only will save you time and money, but also the carbon release into the atmosphere. By mowing planned pathways for your walking enjoyment, it shows your neighbors that this is not an accident. So why does this matter? Why should we care? It has been scientifically proven that biodiversity has a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning if we take 50% of the land, 50% of the species will be gone. By planting native plants, we preserve the biodiversity of our ecosystem. Since there is no place for wildlife left other than our backyards, it is up to us to create landscapes hospitable for them. This is more about relationships than gardening. Native plants are easy to grow. You don't need a big backyard to make a difference. You can even plant them in containers on your deck. You can begin small right now by buying some simple native plants to benefit the ecosystem and keep adding yearly. When your neighbors ask about what you are doing, inform them and encourage them to do the same. Most people are not thrilled about insects in their garden, but they love butterflies. Let them know you are planting a butterfly garden. Before long, the entire neighborhood could be hosting native wildlife, and what began as your own personal quarter acre could turn into an entire development of over 100 acres, sustaining more wildlife than imaginable and preserving our ecosystem. This may sound like a huge problem and one that you might feel is an undaunting undertaking. Remember the words of Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Gardeners have become an important role in managing the nation's wildlife, and you will be the one to make a difference. Check out Douglas W. Tallamy's book, Bringing Home Nature, on more details on how to transform your garden. You can also check out this link to verify if any existing plants in your yard is native to Pennsylvania or not. Thanks so much for listening.